This is an oral history recording with Jo Ann Lekawitch Beatty. The interviewer is Lane Berman, who is a volunteer with the West Volusia Historical Society and who researched and reenacted Jo Ann's life for the DeLand players, and thus has now become a friend.
Yeah.
Today is May 19th, 2025. The interview is being recorded at the DeLand House Museum. Now, DeLand is on the world map as the skydiving capital of the world. Jo Ann was the very first woman to train as a skydiver and to jump here in DeLand in March of 1961. Jo Ann, welcome, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
So what was it like in DeLand when you first came? We know you did not grow up here. So
Right.
what brought you to DeLand?
Well, I have always been a grandparent's child and spent a lot of time with my grandparents who were in Berwyn, Illinois at that time, where I was born and partially raised because I stayed with them so much. And my grandfather retired in 1957, and they had previously been down to visit my aunt and uncle in Jacksonville, and when they had been coming down, we would always take trips around, different parts of the state to see where they would like to retire, and they chose DeLand. So they retired here in 1957, and I just started coming down to visit them, in different holidays, and when I wasn't in school and summers and things, I would come down and visit. And that's how I first came to DeLand.
Mm-hmm. So what was it like? How did you manage to meet people, and why did you stay in DeLand?
I have a little, I'll try to make this quick. When I was in high school up there, I was going to a modeling school, Patricia Stevens Modeling School in downtown Chicago, which there was a Walgreens drugstore with a restaurant in the basement on State Street where we would all go down and have lunch. And I was very excited because my grandparents had moved. I was going to make my first trip down here to stay with them. And I was telling the girls at the table all about coming to Florida. And at the table behind us was a group of sailors that were stationed at the Naval Air Station there. And so the one sailor came over and he said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." And he said, "Where are you going in Florida?" And I said, "Oh, it's just a little town. My grandparents retired there." I said, "It's just a little town. You probably never heard of it." And he said, "Well, where is it?" And I said, "Well, it's DeLand." And he just got this big grin on his face, and he said, "That's where I'm from." And his name was John Pagano. And he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "I'll give you my girlfriend's telephone number, and I'll let her know that you're coming. And when you get there, call her, and she'll make sure, that you get to meet some people and whatever." And I said, "That's great." So that happened, and that was Vivian Dykes at that time. And then she came when I got here. I think it was the second or third day. She came out to my grandparents and brought Jo Ann and Kay Ballou, whose parents owned Ballou Shoe Store at that time. And she brought those girls with her, and the three of us just went gallivanting around, and she introduced me to a lot of kids here. There was the UD Drive-In back then, which was out on 92, and that was a favorite place to hang out. So I got to meet a lot of, the kids already there. My first person that I ever met was Coy Rainey, and I was sitting on the bridge over there on Marsh Road. That old Daytona Road used to go all the way through from Marsh Road all the way into the airport and past. So there was a little bridge there, and I was sitting there, and Coy came riding up on his horse. And so we became friends, and he would bring his horses over to my grandparents because they lived right there by the airport on Palmetto off of Marsh Road. So we'd go horseback riding, and that's, another person that I met here. So
DeLand was certainly welcoming. So how did you discover skydiving, and what made you do it?
I think I had always loved aviation to some degree. When I was a little girl, about 7 or 8, I had my very first airplane ride by myself from Chicago to Jacksonville to my aunt and uncles and my cousins. And I, at that point, was just in awe of the stewardess. It was a Delta Airlines, and of course you had to walk out on the tarmac, and go up the little ladder to get into the plane, and the stewardesses took me from that point onto the plane. And because I was by myself, they just kind of really doted on me, and I thought, oh, this is really great, and I just thought they were so beautiful, and I wanted to be an airline stewardess from that point. But then as I got older, I also wanted to be a professional ice skater, so neither one happened. But my grandparents lived on Palmetto, which was right there by the airport, so I would see when I would go out in the yard, and I knew on the weekends that they were jumping, and I'd go and watch them. My grandfather liked his beer, so he would go down to the airport restaurant a lot, and he would have his beer down there and sit and watch. So I got him to take me with him and got to talking to the fellas down there that were jumping. And one day I just asked one of them, I said, "Can I jump with you?" And I just wanted to jump. I wanted to. And he kind of grinned, and there were a couple guys sitting there, and they just kind of all grinned, and they said, "Well, you're too young, you would have to have your parents' permission." So that's all I needed to hear. And, went home, called my mom, and she said no. Absolutely not. So that led to letter writing, and finally she agreed, and I took the letter, her permission letter that I received a couple weeks later, I took it back out to the airport and gave it to Dr. John Gaffney, who was the president of the group at that time. And he just grinned and started laughing, and the guys all started laughing. And they said, "Okay, well, you've got the permission, so we're going to train you." And that's how I got started.
Okay. What did the airport look like back then?
Well, back in those days, the airport looked very, very different. There were a lot of the bunkers that were left there, and a lot of the military buildings, barracks and such, because it had been the Naval Air Station back in the day. And so there was a lot of military things there. The big hangar we used to use to pack our parachutes, we'd keep them out of the rain and bad weather and the grass and everything. And a lot of times we would stay there on the weekends. And even though I lived close, it was fun just to be there. And I had a very good friend, Judy Perino, and we were high school friends. And she would stay there too. Her parents and my grandparents, they all knew we were in good hands because those guys were just like our big older brothers. And there was no, the Skydive DeLand that's there now, of course, wasn't. And it's just so different, when you go out there now, because a lot of those buildings are gone. There's very little out there now that you could even see, except the museum. You can go see the museum out there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, skydiving, the very first time skydiving occurred at DeLand Airport was in 1958, actually, December 1958. The Falling Angels Parachute Club was created in 1959. So you were one of the original Falling Angels.
Right.
So who were the Falling Angels? How many of them were there?
There weren't a whole lot of us, although we did have some people that would come occasionally. But the main group consisted of Dr. John Gaffney, of course. He was the president of the Falling Angels. Chris Ebersole, who was a fishing guide. He lived up in Astor, and he was one of the main members. Hal Wright, who was a dear, sweet man. He was deaf, and he was an airplane mechanic down at Herndon Airport in Orlando. But he was also our safety officer. He was very safety conscious. He would fly his planes. He had his own plane, which a lot of times he would use if we were having exhibitions or meets at the airport. Hal would volunteer to use his own private plane for us also. That was before we had a lot of the big planes. but Hal would fly by feel because he couldn't hear. So, and he had his instrument panels, and I flew with him several times from down to Orlando and back. But he was a very kind, gentle man. He was one of the main group. Razor, who was Ray Dougherty, he has now passed away. He was one of the first guys out there. Charlie Neely was, he was from Daytona. I don't remember exactly what he did professionally, but there were probably 7 or 8 main people that were there every weekend, and then we would have some folks that would come, from other areas occasionally, or, and then eventually the club started growing and they started coming more and more. But
so can you tell us what your original training was like? I mean, you were the first woman they trained. So
oh yeah.
What was that like?
I was the little sister that nobody wanted to get hurt, so they made absolutely sure that I was trained properly, and I think more properly than anybody else had ever been trained. But those little bunkers I was talking about, they would put a ladder on the side of the bunker. They put a mat down on the side on the ground. Up the ladder I would go to the top of the bunker. I would jump off the top and go and do my parachute landing falls, with PLFs we called them. And you had to learn how to land, because back in those days the parachutes did not have the steerability. They didn't have all the cutouts, and not like they are today at all. We had the big my first jump was a 32-foot Army parachute that had no cutouts, but most of them were like the 28-foot. So you had to learn how to land with those, because the landings were pretty hard. And when you landed, you kept your eyes on the horizon always. You never looked at the ground, because it would come up and smack you in the face. And I learned that the hard way one time. And so you would look at the horizon, and when you would touch the ground, your feet would touch, and then you would roll. You would just bend and roll around and get up and grab your lines, and that's how you would land. So I had to practice those parachute landing falls until I got it perfect. And they would sit there and go, "No, that's not a good one, try again." So up I'd go again. I must have done 50 of them before they were satisfied with my landings. Then I had to train to come through electrical wires or drop into water, where I would sometimes, or if in a tree, how you would release. So I got hung in a tree a few times, quite a few times, until I learned how to release. And again, they would put a mat down, and they would hang me there. I would have to release and, put my hands up to, to come through the lines safely, or to, land in the water safely, and what to do and how to release. So also we had our manual, the manual I had to study, the Parachute Club of America. You had to pass that exam pretty much. So that was something I did at home, and then I got questioned. But it took weeks and weeks before they would let me jump. So I had extensive training, and they just all were, like I said, I was a little sister, and they weren't going to let anything happen.
They took good care of you. So tell us about your first jump. Were you scared?
I was excited. I think you wouldn't be normal if you didn't have some apprehension, no matter when. Even, as you continue jumping, there's always a little something. But I was so excited. And so my first jump was from 3,200 feet. I had this big 32-foot Army parachute, and when you jumped back then, we were using Cessnas, so there was the pilot and 3 jumpers in each plane. So I was the first jumper out, and you would get out of the plane and actually stand outside of the plane after the streamer had been thrown, and you knew where your landing was. You had to do that. You would actually get out of the plane and stand on the step and on the strut, and you were holding on, and then you would push off from there and go into a free fall position. So my first jump was a static line. The first 5 jumps were always static line. That was a Parachute Club of America requirement at that time. And so my first jump, as I said, was 3,200 feet, but I only weighed like 100 pounds. So I kept getting, after my chute opened, which was like 5 seconds, I kept getting updrafts. And so the guys were down there and they're watching and waiting and everything. And so it took me a long time to come down. And because I was so excited and I was just looking all around, I was steering around looking at everything. I could see the ocean, I could see out west, and it was just so beautiful and so cool. So of course I missed the target, but I had, it was just great. And
so there was never a question about continuing or doing a second and third
I
jump.
couldn't wait. I just couldn't wait to get back up. And
how did your grandparents respond to this? I mean, after all, they were responsible.
Yeah. My grandma never would come out and watch. She would watch from the house, and she didn't really know, which one was me coming out. But we told her, usually I'm the first one out anyway. At that point in jumping, I was usually the first one out. And my grandfather was all excited for me, and I have to say, I have to thank my family because they were always so helpful and letting me do some of the things that I really wanted to do. My grandfather would come to the airport with me many times, not all the time, but sometimes, and he would say, well, I want to come and watch, when you jump. So on the first jump, when he came out there, he had a heart condition. So I said, okay, you can come and watch me jump, but please, I want you to lay down on the grass. So I brought a blanket, a towel, I don't remember what it was, but I had my grandfather lay down on my first jump because I was afraid that he would pass out or something, and, but he was okay with it, and he was happy with it. But like I said, Grandma just never, she never wanted to come out and watch. She watched from the house.
What about at school? I mean, you were the only skydiver at DeLand High School. So
Yeah.
how did your fellow students respond?
Well, I didn't know a lot of students at that point because I had come in January. I started school. I had got mono really bad up in Chicago, and I wasn't allowed to continue school because my counselor up there wouldn't let me try to make up my work, even though I begged, and she just absolutely refused. So I came to DeLand that Christmas, and I asked my grandma to take me to the high school here, and she did, and Mrs. Denman was there, and she said if I can make up the work, I can graduate in June. So I started school in January. Actually, Gus Gibbs and I both started at the same time because he had come from from Georgia Military School about the same time, so we were both new students. But I met a lot of the people there, but nobody was really all excited about it and everything. Bobby Groom did some article in our in the Growler in the paper, but it was like the only people that were really excited were Gary and Joe Dupuy, and they were younger than me, but they would hunt me down at lunchtime or whatever, and with a million questions, and we got to be really good friends also. They also, both of them came and jumped out there shortly, right after I started. They came real close behind me. I don't know which one of them, but one of them, it might have been Gary because he was younger than Joe, had his dad sign a release that he was old enough, and he really wasn't, but he did anyway. But those two, I mean, somebody, once in a while somebody would say, "Are you nuts? What are you crazy?" And I just laugh, and say, "It's fun, come on out there and join now." But it wasn't really a big deal to anybody.
Okay, I just want to add that Gary and Joe Dupuy had taken over management of the skydiving center in the early 70s when Doc Gaffney got tired of it all and walked away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you certainly had a big influence on the Dupuy brothers.
Yeah, they were good friends. I saw them, every time I'd come back to DeLand, I was back and forth from Chicago to DeLand numerous times after high school graduation. And I would always go, well, I continued to jump out there after high school. When I would come back from Chicago, I'd be out there jumping. And I was living, then I moved here to Orlando with Judy, my friend, and two of my cousins. We got an apartment, so every weekend we were all up here, and I was jumping and they were rooting me on.
So, were you ever scared? Did you ever get hurt from skydiving?
Well, like I said, I think everybody has this little something, but it's not enough to ward off, wanting to jump. I did get hurt one time. Like I said, I took my eyes off the horizon and looked at the ground, and it came and smacked me, and I was on my knees, and it put me on crutches for a couple weeks. But nothing was broken. It was just really, it was just hard to walk. So, that was the only time. We had an exhibition jump one time down at that time was McCoy Air Force Base in Orlando. It is now International Airport. So at that time we were doing an exhibition jump for Armed Forces Day, I think, or one of the military holidays. We were doing an exhibition. And when I went into a flat spin when I exited the plane, and that's when you are in the free fall position, and you can go into a flat spin just by your hand or something, being wrong. And when I realized I couldn't control it, I don't know if it was the wind or whatever, but I was having a real hard time controlling the flat spin. And after I, realized that I was losing my time, I went ahead and pulled my chute. Well, when I did, because I was in a flat spin, it twisted my lines. When when it popped open, my lines twisted. And so I looked up and I saw that, and thankfully it was not a Mae West where the lines were over the canopy, but they were just twisted. So I just, started, instead of pulling my reserve chute, which I had and could have used, I started twisting my legs the opposite direction, and eventually it did pop it open. But it put me off target, at that point too. But that was the only time I think that I really kind of had a little apprehension, more than, normal.
So in all your jumps, that's the only malfunction you ever had?
Yeah, that's the only one.
Pretty nice.
Yeah.
What did it cost you? I mean, all this training and for the jumps you made, wasn't it quite expensive?
Not then, because it wasn't a business back then. From what I hear now from others, it's pretty expensive to jump. Cotton Yonley was the owner of DeLand Air Service at that time, and he was our main pilot. It was very inexpensive compared to today.
Yep.
It was we gave Cotton $3 a piece for his gas for the plane for each jump that we made. So that was really basically, there were, like when you first joined, there was dues, I think, to the Parachute Club of America and National Aeronautics Association, but for our jumps it was $3 a jump.
Okay, and I know you did buy your own parachute and rig and all that, and
I
what
did.
did that cost you?
Well, Hal Wright eventually sold me one of his rigs, which included a Passionate Purple pilot chute that I kept for many years until, because it was nylon, eventually it rotted away. But I kept that for a long, long time. I had my backpack, my reserve, boots. I don't remember if I got the boots from Hal, because I think I had already gotten the boots and I had my jumpsuit and everything my own. But my rig I bought from Hal for $80, and he was letting me graciously make payments to him for a long time to pay it off. But that's how I, acquired my own equipment. But it took a long time too, to get it paid off.
Yeah, I
Because
bet.
I was in high school and I wasn't really working then, but I had an allowance.
Mm-hmm. How long did you continue as a skydiver?
I continued until I was pregnant with my first child, and my husband didn't think it was a good idea for me to really continue at that point. Um, so that's kind of when it ended for me as far as skydiving, and that was in 1964. So,
Okay, so that was 3 years of actively jumping. Yeah.
right, and I would jump also when I went back to Chicago. There was a club up in Gray's Lake, and I jumped up there. So when I was in Chicago, I was still jumping, and I was carrying my chute back and forth and my equipment back and forth. When I graduated high school, right after graduation, I went back to Chicago with Judy, who had flown from her grandparents' house in New York to Chicago. So her and I and two of my cousins got the apartment in Orlando, and we, we would go up on the weekends and stuff and jump there. So
Okay, well, how do you think skydiving has affected you in the long run?
I think it's taught me that if you really, if your heart is set on something, go for it, and put forth every effort that you can to make it happen. Primarily, I think God is in control of our lives, and, He has blessed me tremendously throughout my whole life, through all my craziness, with motorcycles, parachutes, and everything else. He has been right there. But as far as changing me, I think that that's what it showed me, to follow your dream and, try to do the best you can to make it happen. So it's, I've just kind of felt that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and when did you move back to DeLand from Chicago?
In 1967, late 67, my marriage failed up there, and I brought my daughter, and we came back to DeLand, and I got a job at Stetson as the alumni director secretary there for a while, until he got sent to the FBI, and they didn't have his business. And that's where I met Jack Fortis also. We worked closely with Jack. And so at that point, I ended up staying here. A couple years later, I got remarried to Barry Beatty, had two more daughters, and that just ended up staying here. And we bought a house on Lizy Drive, and I will say this, that it is Lizy Drive and not lazy, because Larry Lizy was my schoolmate, and his dad built that subdivision back in 61 when we were in school. And my street is Lizy Drive, and the street behind me is Larry, who is my schoolmate, and there's another little street that hasn't even really been developed, and that's Barbara Court, and that was Larry's sister, Barbara. So anyway, it's Lizy Drive. And his mother actually was at our 50th reunion, and when I was telling people that I lived on Lizy Drive, she came up and she said to me, "I'm so happy to hear you say that, because Larry had passed by that time." And she said, "It just made my heart feel good, that you still call it Lizy Drive."
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is skydiving the craziest thing you've ever done? What other sort of adventures have you had since then?
Well, I love motorcycles also. I had a nice head-on collision with somebody down on Voris, and the only thing I can really remember about that is being upside down, flying over her car. I saw a car underneath me, and then I landed on the street, and I didn't remember anything after that. Woke up in the hospital in Daytona at Halifax after they had transferred me back and forth from DeLand, and then they wouldn't do anything here. They said send her to Daytona, so I went there. But anyway, that was one crazy thing. Right now, my favorite thing to do is ziplining through the mountains in North Carolina. I love it. It is just the most fun thing, other than skydiving, which, but it's we found a course up there that's really, really nice. It's long, it's high. They have a little rappel area where you can rappel down, and they have a swinging bridge on this course. It's just really fun. It's outside of Boone.
Mm. And so have your children also inherited this adventurous spirit of yours?
A couple of them, I think. Well, my daughter, Christy, at 18, she decided she wanted to skydive. So her and a couple of her girlfriends went out and they did tandem jumps when she was 18. But that was enough for her. She enjoyed it. She's got a video, and they had fun with it. My son-in-law, David Grimes, he has made several jumps out there, I believe, at this point with a couple of friends. And my youngest, excuse me, one of my young grandsons, he's 18 now, he is into paramotoring. So where I went from the top down, he's going from the bottom up, and he's got a wing. He was in Americus, Georgia this past weekend. They had a big meet up there, and my daughter said there were like 1,000 people up there with their wings. But he's gone up, above the clouds. When I go and watch him and I see him and he disappears and he's gone, and then I see this little speck and there he is, but he's into the paramotoring. So I don't know if you could say that's inheritance, but he got that spirit, I guess. He loves, and he wants to be an astronaut. That's his dream. So he just graduated high school, and he's working towards that with his continued schooling. He's got everything hopefully planned out where, no guarantee of the astronaut, but he's going to work towards it.
Fantastic. So over the years that you've lived here in DeLand, what kind of changes have you witnessed since 1961?
A lot. And sadly, I have to say I'm very upset with a lot of the growth. It breaks my heart to see the dead animals on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. I can't stand it. I call it raping the landscape, because they are just wiping out trees. They're wiping out our forests. The land used to be, full of orange groves, and of course I know that weather had a lot to do with destroying that. But you used to be able to go down, even down by Lake Beersford, all around there were orange groves everywhere. Yeah. There were animals, the wild animals, and I love all animals, so it just breaks my heart to see what they're doing with the subdivisions and the continued traffic. There was no I-4 in 1961, so if you wanted to go to Orlando, you had to drive 1792 all the way. And there was 2 high schools. The kids that came to our high school were from Pearson all the way from DeBerry. So the school bus had a big route at that time. Mm-hmm. They didn't have their own high school up there, so we had kids from all over.
So everybody came to DeLand High School.
To DeLand, and it was the old building on the corner of Rich and Clara. No, not Clara.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I went from me, but the building's not there anymore, because after graduation I saw a few of my classmates. Well, it was quite a long time later, actually. I was older, but somebody burned the building. Oh. And so it was, it's not there anymore.
Okay, and can you tell us about your passion for cats?
Oh, I'm a cat lady.
But sure.
Like I said, I love all animals. I work with a group here in DeLand. We do trap, neuter, return. And then we usually end up taking care of the colonies that we trap, because, a lot of them are out in the woods or in places where they're not fed. So we take care of a lot of them also. I ended up with quite a few at my house that became not feral anymore, and I take care of them. At the present time, I'm trying to help the monarch butterfly population, so I'm also trying to raise monarchs, and to date this year now, I've released 71. So I'm real happy with that. I don't know, the caterpillars are getting more sparse now. I bring them in. I have caterpillar cages on my back porch. So when I have 31 milkweed plants that I inherited from an elderly couple that were moving, and they were all in pots, so I brought them to my house, and they are, like I said, the caterpillars now are, I think they're taking a sabbatical or something because I don't see as many. But I did have one, again, come out yesterday. But, the cats are, yeah, I have to take care of them.
Yeah, you sure do. Okay, well, thank you so much for this wonderful, informative talk. And as an ex-skydiver myself, I really appreciate your breaking through the glass ceiling and being the first woman to be jumping at Skydive DeLand.
Well,
it's
thank
really
you.
impressive, and an awful lot of lady skydivers here in DeLand admire you greatly.
Well,
you have a lot of fans here.
Well, thank you very much. I don't feel like, I deserve that because I was doing it for fun. I didn't, it was.
We all were, dear.
Yeah. Well, because you have more jumps than I do. But, I'm very proud that, that the other ladies came and, were willing to try it and follow their dreams too.
They sure were.
Yeah.
Yep. The DeLand ladies skydiving team broke world records. I think they still hold those world records for women skydiving. Yeah.
That's great.
Jo Ann, how would you like to be remembered?
Well, that's really kind of a hard question to answer. I guess just someone that loves people, loves animals, and followed her dreams, loves my family more than anything. I have been very blessed to have 3 daughters with 3 wonderful son-in-laws. I call them son-in-laws because that's how I feel about them. Oh. And my grandchildren, and they are right now, number 1 under God. But I think just to be remembered that I love people, and I'm very thankful. I love the Lord with all my heart. I want to be remembered, and I hope that the young people today will take very seriously their relationships with God, because it's so important. And I hope that that they will get that they will feel it. But that's, I don't know how else I would want to be remembered.
Okay, thank you.